Hi there, this is Shauna from the Foiled Fox. Thanks so much for joining me today. Today I'm going to be doing a card for Mother's Day since the holiday is so close. And I also get the chance to feature one of Penny Black's brand new stamps, and it's called Dreams in Love. It's this big beautiful blossom. And then it does have a matching die that has the words love and happiness, but we won't use those today, but great for another time. This is Youthful, a new stamp for them also, great standalone, or the way we're going to use it today. And then Spellbinders is a hem stitch frames. And so we're going to start out today with some piece of hot press watercolor paper, tattered rose distress ink, and then we'll use a distress marker. Any light green marker will do. So I'm stamping the blossom, and then I'm going to color in the green with the marker. By doing this, if I just color in the green, I'm controlling those little bits of green and making sure it stays in the proper place. So I'm stamping this, and I put it in the MISTI because I wanted to stamp it again. I want a real nice impression, so I'm going to stamp just the blossom again. The foliage turned out fine, but the blossom needs to be a little bit darker. And you don't have to worry with the tattered rose, it's quite a light color. And since we'll be using a little bit darker colors, you don't have to worry about it showing. This will end up looking like no line coloring. And then for the watercolors today, I'm going to be using some distress stains. I'm using worn lipstick, picked raspberry, aged mahogany, and for the colors of the flower, and then we'll go into some other colors. So to start, I have a clean brush with some water on it, and then I just go around one petal, only one petal at first, and I add in some worn lipstick and then a little picked raspberry, just to give it a little bit of the color. And then slowly I'm going to start to add the aged mahogany. But first I'm going to get some of these petals colored in. Now you notice that I'm doing a petal opposite the other one, or away from it. And the reason why is because this flower, but anytime you're doing something that's individual, you want to be sure that you're not doing it side by side, because they will have a tendency to blend together. As you know with watercolors, that if wherever there's water it will go, and wherever there's water it won't. So just keep that in mind, that I just moisten that area with clean water, put in a little bit of warm lipstick, then I'll add the picked raspberry, and then we'll add some aged mahogany in just a minute. But I'm just going going through each petal, trying very hard to maintain the white space that you see there. You can follow that just exactly as Penny Black designed the stamp. And that really helps with shading. And if you're like me, I have a trouble with shading sometimes, so this really is a great aid. Now you can see I'm adding in just the tiniest bit of the aged mahogany. That is a strong color, so you only need a tiny bit. And I'm just putting a little bit down there and maybe dots in other places, and then rinsing my brush real quick, not making it too wet, and then just putting water right behind it, or brushing right behind where I put the color, and that gives it a path for it to follow and blend out. So I'm going to be doing that with each of the petals. You can see it's starting to take shape and get some more depth to it. So here's another petal where we're using the worn lipstick. First the water, worn lipstick, then picked raspberry, and then the teeniest bit of, we'll go back and do the teeniest bit of aged mahogany. And then I just showed you the package for Penny Black. They do have, the nice thing about Penny Black is they do show a nice colored picture of the stamp, and you can see how they do the shading, and that's a really nice aid if you get a little lost. So here, this big petal, I followed the same rule of first water, then worn lipstick, then a little picked raspberry, and then a little bit, tiny bit of the aged mahogany, and maintaining that white space. Maintaining that white space not only gives it dimension, but it makes it have a reflection. Then there's these few petals like this one that are kind of behind, and I'm making those just a little bit darker because they would naturally be darker in nature if they were a little behind because of the shadow. A tiny bit of aged mahogany. You can see it's just the tiniest bit. When you maintain the spaces and you control your water, then you can really control where your paints go. And that's what I would really recommend with this, so that you can keep the detail, and it has beautiful detail. So just manage your water, not too much, and then you can manage where your paint goes. Here I'm going to add in a little bit darker. And then as we get to the center, I saved that for last because I'm going to make that even darker yet. But I'm going to touch up in here with little bits of the darker color. And you'll see me do that as fiddling, I guess you can call it. But you do that with watercolor. With any paints actually, right? So just adding some more depth by adding in a little bit more of the aged mahogany. And I hope you can see just how I just pull away that little tiny bead of aged mahogany and just barely have my brush touch it. Now, what I recommend when you're doing this is to use one of your best paint brushes. That really helps a great deal. Because a good paintbrush will help you with the control of water and the way it goes on. You can always use like a black silver brush. We do have that. You'll see that in the supply list, which by the way, you can always check out. There's a link down below that'll pop you over to the blog. There you'll find more close-ups and a complete supply list. Plus, you will see lots of other projects. So here I moistened it. I took out some black soot. I mixed it up a little bit with the aged mahogany and the picked raspberry. I'm just want to make sure that it's not completely black, that it has a little bit of that colors that we use, but it is mostly black. Now you can see I'm using the distress stains, and they're in the dauber bottle. Now they come now in a spray, but they're exactly the same formula. So if you go to buy them in the spray. They work exactly the same. If you really love them in the dauber bottle, you can buy empty dauber bottles, and I'll put those in the supply list. Now for the stems and for the leaves, I'm first using a marker. This happens to be peeled paint, but you can choose whatever greens you'd like. And then I'm putting out peeled paint. I'm using forest moss, a little bit of crushed olive, and a little bit of weathered wood. I do like just a tiny bit of blue in my leaves. So I'm moistening, doing it the exact same way, where I'll moisten the leaf, and then I'll add in the color, and then the dark color for the shading will be down near the stem. Now the reason why I used a marker for the stem is very delicate, and I want to keep it that way, and I'm afraid that if I use my brush with the water, it'll create a wider line, and then we know the watercolor goes where there's water, and it would make that stem a lot thicker, and I didn't want to do that. So a good way to control it is just to use the distress marker, and I am using the fine point, not the brush point. And that again keeps that really nice delicate look to the stem. So you can see I'm just continuing to color these leaves. I do vary the color of the leaves, but not as much as maybe I should have. Variation in the color of leaves is always a good thing. It adds interest, and it doesn't make it look so monotone. I'm just going to go in and color those, and then go up to this last little spray of leaves and add in the peeled paint after I've moistened it. And it is just a moistening, not flooding it with water. And I'm just going to add in these colors, trying to vary it a little bit. But like I said, a little bit more variation probably would have been good. But there's just enough green to really make this flower pop. And now for the center, I'm taking a very fine point pen. This is by Zig. It will be in the supply list. It's a .005, very fine. I'm adding some lines and a few dots for a little bit of detail. And then I'm going to go back with a little bit of the aged mahogany, and I'm going to just touch it up. Some of these flowers, if you look at the illustration on the packaging, had some modeling, and that kind of got lost when we were doing some watercoloring. So I'm trying to add that in a little bit where there were little dots of darker color. And that really works very well by using the aged mahogany. Now, if the dots are kind of too distinct for you, just brush over it lightly with a moistened brush. And now I'm taking a marker, a darker marker, I think this is forest moss, and I'm just going and adding a little bit of detail to each of those flowers by adding in some veining. And I'm going to sharpen up that stem using the forest moss peeled paint, and I think this is Shabby Shutters, but you can really just choose whatever greens work for you. But that fine point really adds a nice control to it in color. Now I'm going to use the die, and I'm going to cut around it. The die cuts around it beautifully, and then I'm set that aside. I didn't show that, but I'll set that aside. But now we're going to do the background. So we're using Youthful, which is, like I mentioned before, Penny Black's new stamp also, and it's a really nice standalone stamp, but we're going to use it for the background today. So I'm inking it up with Versamark ink, which is a clear ink, and I'm going to stamp all over it. Now, before you do that, be sure that you use your anti-static powder tool so that you can make sure that embossing powder releases. And so I'm going to stamp this all over, making sure that I cover up the entire background, but still leaving some space where you're seeing the background color of the paper. This is my last little bit I'm going to stamp in, and then I'm going to use some white embossing powder, and I'm going to sprinkle this all over, and I am going to heat emboss it. I'm not going to show you that today because it's a large area and it would take forever, so just know that I heat emboss that. So there it is real quick. Now here I'm taking out the hem stitch frames from Spellbinders. I'm taking the frame and then the hem stitching, which is the dots. I'm using some tape to hold that together, and then I'm going to cut that out of a piece of Nina White. And now I have some foam that I've cut that to the size of the panel, and then a foam for the background. Now I'm kind of deciding, I'm looking here, I think that the background is a little strong, so I'm going to lighten it up. I'm going to make it have a little softer, more muted look, and I'm going to do that by using Lawn Fawn, a pigment white ink. I love their ink, and it will be in the supply list, and I'm using a blending tool, and I'm just adding it, and it really adds a nice quality. I know I could have used a lighter piece of paper, but I don't think that it would have had the same effect as it does with this, because you can see the background color, but then it has this really pretty cloudy feeling around it, and also softens the embossing. So we're going to set that aside to dry, and we're going to do the sentiment. This is also a new stamp set. It's called Best Mom from Penny Black. I'm going to play it safe today and use Happy Mother's Day, but there's many other sentiments that are great for this. So using the anti-static tool, and then adding Versamark ink on the stamp, and then stamping it, and I'm going to now sprinkle it with, this is Alta New Copper, and I'm going to make sure that I get a good amount of that, but it's also not sticking in those areas that I don't like. In fact, I'm going to take a little tiny brush and just brush away any little errant bits, because as you know, if you heat emboss with them there, then they're going to really show up when they melt. So here I'm going to heat emboss it. I'm going to show this heat embossing because it's just a little bit, but remember on the background I did heat emboss it, so be sure you do that. And then now that that's done, it's time to put this together. So I'm adding some tape to the back of the background, putting on the foam. That's going to pop it up a bit. And then I'm going to put that on our card base. And first I'm going to put the foam though on our white panel. And you can see it's not where the holes are. I want to make sure that hem stitching shows. And so I'm going to add some tape to the back of this, put it on our card base. I did trim it slightly so that it's a tiny bit smaller than the card base. And then I'm going to add the white panel. And you can see that now that background just shows so nicely. And then you have this white backdrop for your big, beautiful blossom. So on the flower, now that I pressed that into place finally, you know, trying to get that straight is always a challenge. I have some foam tape on the back. I'm peeling that off. And I did put a little bit of foam down at the stem. Be sure you do that because you want to give it strength and it doesn't get bent or torn off. And then I put some foam tape on the back of the sentiment, and there you go. A beautiful card for Mother's Day. I just love this big blossom. It's just gorgeous and you can use it so many ways. Great to go into one of the vases as well that you can get from Penny Black. But I hope you enjoyed this project. I certainly enjoyed making it. I'm so glad you joined me today. I hope that if you did enjoy it, that you would give us a thumbs up. But also, if you haven't already, please subscribe. We would love that. We'd be over the moon, in fact, if you did that. And then be sure to click the bell if you want to be notified when we have our next video. So again, thanks so much for joining us. Pop over to the blog for lots of inspiration, the supply list, and more close-ups. And we'll see you next time.